Hello everyone, this is Gene Geog History, and today I'm going to be covering the Sahel region or the Sahelian, whatever term that you want to use. I feel like this is an area of the world that isn't talked about much, so of course I'm going to get into where this is as a region, an anthropological, ethnic, and a potentially racial area slash lens. So the Sahel is one of the world's largest it's one of the world's most fascinating anthropological transition zones, and it is one of the largest transition zones as well. Rather than being a single ethnic, racial, or cultural region, it is best understood as a broad ecological and civilization corridor stretching across Africa between the Sahara Desert and the tropical savannas. From the west to the east, it runs through parts of Senegal, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Chad, Sudan, and into Eritrea. So, as an ecological region, think of Africa as three broad belts: the Mediterranean North Africa, the Sahel, which is the semi arid transition zone, and tropical Africa. The Sahel receives enough rainfall to support grasslands, thorn scrub, seasonal farming, cattle herding, but not enough to sustain dense forests. Historically, it made it ideal for caravan routes, pastoral nomadism, mixed agriculture, and empires linking North and Sub-Saharan Africa. As an anthropological region, the Sahel is one of humanity's greatest contact zones. Instead of separating North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, it has historically connected them. Over thousands of years, the region saw interaction between Saharan pastoralists, Nile peoples, West African farmers, Cushitic populations, Berber populations, Arab populations, and Nilotic populations. So, this constant interaction produced populations that often cannot be neatly classified into traditional confidential categories. Linguistically, the Sahel contains languages from several unrelated families. So there are the Afro-Asiatic languages, which includes Arabic, Hausa, Berber languages, and Tebu, which dominate the northern portions. Nilo-Saharan languages, which include Kanuri, Songhe, Zagawa, and Fur. Then there are the Niger-Congo languages, which includes Fulfulde, Bambara, Wolof, and numerous Mandi languages. So, I'm going to talk about the major ethnic groups in the area. So, the first one are the Fulani people, and these are perhaps the most quintessential Sahelian people. Characteristics include pastoral tradition. They spread from Senegal to Sudan. They speak Fulfulde. They are historically mobile and they have a major role in Islamic scholarships and state formation. Genetically and physically, they often show varying mixtures of West African and Northeast African related ancestry, though this varies considerably across different Fulani communities. The second group are the Tuareg. So this includes the Amazi Berber origin, or they have that origin. There are Sahara specialists. There are camel caravans. They have blue indigo clothing, and they speak Tamashek. They are historically linked to North Africa with West Africa. So that's kind of somewhat the blend there. The next group are the Hausa, and they are one of Africa's largest ethnic groups. They are known for urban trading cities, Islamic scholarships, agriculture, and commerce. They are centered largely in northern Nigeria and southern Niger. The fourth major group are the Kanuri, who are successors of the historic Kanem Bornu civilization, and they have strong Saharan connections for over 1,000 years. And the fifth group that I'm mainly going to talk about here are the Songhai, and they're obviously associated with the historic Songhai Empire as they mixed farming, river commerce, and trans-Saharan trade. Okay, so when it comes to religion, the Sahel is predominantly Sunni Islam, especially today. Traditional African beliefs remain influential in many communities, and there are also Christian populations, especially towards the southern margins. Islam spread primarily through merchants, scholars, Sufi networks, and local rulers, rather than large scale conquest. Okay, so now we're moving on to the section of why they and their descendants are grouped together. So obviously the main reason is geographic grouping, and it's the primary reason. Today, Sahelian is first and foremost a geographic label. People are grouped together because they originate from the same ecological belt stretching across Africa, not because they descend from a single ancestral group. So, the Fulani, Hausa, Tuareg, and Zagawa all inhabit the Sahel, but they have distinct histories, languages, and ancestral origins. Anthropological grouping is the second reason. So, anthropologists also group Sahelian peoples together because they share many historical processes like the long distance trans Saharan trade, pastoralism and mixed farming, the spread of Islam, centuries of interaction and intermarriage, and adaptation to similar climates. So, their shared experiences based on these elements created an overlapping cultural traditions despite their ethnic diversity. Okay, so the third reason is genetic slash population grouping. So population geneticists sometimes identify a broad Sahelian cluster or a gradient, but this doesn't mean that there's a single Sahelian ancestry. Instead, many Sahelian populations occupy intermediate positions between neighboring or regional populations because of thousands of years of gene pool. So, pretty much, here are some examples. Many Fulani groups show varying proportions of West African ancestry alongside ancestry related to Northeast Africa or North African populations. Tuareg populations often have substantial MSC, i.e., Berber, related ancestry with varying degrees of sub Saharan African admixture. Hausa populations generally cluster with neighboring West African populations while also reflecting historical trans Saharan connections. These are broad tendencies, and each population has its own demographic history. So the fourth reason is historical grouping. So for over 2,000 years, the Sahel functioned as a connected world through empires, trade networks, and religion. Major states such as the Mali Empire, Songhai Empire, and Kanem Barnu Empire tied together many different people. This shared history encouraged historians to discuss them collectively as Sahelian societies. Okay, so the next section of the video is going over the timeline of the Sahel. So before 10,000 BCE, this is the Green Sahara. So long before the Sahel existed in its current form, much of today's Sahara was green. So there were lakes, rivers, and grasslands that covered much of North Africa. Large mammals such as elephants, giraffes, hippos, and crocodiles lived where the desert exists today, and hunter-gatherer populations spread across the region. The ancestors of many later Saharan and Sahelian people likely lived throughout this much greener landscape. So, from 10,000 to 5,000 BCE, this is where the early pastoral society started coming in. So, as rainfall gradually declined in the area, cattle domestication spread elsewhere or to the corners. Seasonal migration became common. Pastoralism emerged as a major way of life. Communities began adapting to increasingly dry conditions. This period laid the foundation for the mobile cattle herding traditions that still characterize many Sahelian societies today. So from 5000 to 2000 BCE. So this is the official desertification. So the Sahara underwent drying dramatically. Major consequences included populations moving south into the Sahel, others moving towards the Nile Valley, increased competition for water, and the emergence of the Sahel as a distinct ecological zone. Many populations that had once lived across the central Sahara became concentrated along its southern edge. So from 2000 to 500 BCE, this is where the early farming and regional exchange started becoming prominent. So the agriculture expanded a lot, which included crops like pura, millet, and sorghum. Communities increasingly combined farming, cattle herding, fishing, and local trade. Long distance exchange between North Africa and the Sahel also became more frequent due to this. So around 5000 BCE to 300 CE, this is where the birth of the trans-Saharan trade started happening. So the introduction of the camel transformed the region. Instead of the Sahara being an almost impassable barrier, camel caravans made regular crossings possible. Major trade items included salt, gold, copper, ivory, textiles, and livestock. The Sahel became the commercial middle ground between North Africa and tropical West Africa. So, from 300 to 800 CE, this is where the rise of the first kingdoms really started. So, political centralization increased, early states developed around the control of the caravan routes, taxation, agriculture, and military organization. The foundations of large Sahelian empires emerged here. So from 800 to 1200, this is the period of the Ghana Empire. So the Ghana Empire became the first great Sahelian empire. Its wealth came from gold production, taxing trade, controlling caravan routes, and the empire connected merchants from North Africa with gold producing regions farther south. Islam also became increasingly influential among rulers and merchants. So from 1200 to 1450, this is when the Mali Empire took place. So the Mali Empire became one of the richest states in medieval history. This was arguably the golden age of the Western Sahel. Major developments included the expansion of international trade, flourishing scholarships, urban growth, and diplomatic contact with North Africa and the Middle East. The reign of Mansa Musa from 1312 to 1337 symbolized this era. His famous pilgrimage to Mecca demonstrated the immense wealth of the empire. Cities such as Timbuktu and Djinni became major centers of learning and commerce. So, from 1450 to 1600, the Songhai Empire. So, the Songhai Empire succeeded Mali as the dominant Western Sahelian power. It controlled the Niger River caravan routes, major cities, agricultural production, Islamic universities, and libraries flourishing here. The empire eventually fell after a Moroccan invasion in 1591, weakening centralized authority in the Western Sahel. So while the Western Sahel had the empires that I just discussed, the Eastern Sahel saw the rise of the Kanem Bornu Empire. So centered around Lake Chad, it became one of Africa's longest lasting states, thriving on trade, cavalry, and Islamic scholarship. So from 1600 to 1800, we have the regional kingdoms. So after the decline of the great empires, smaller kingdoms emerged, trade continued, Islamic scholarships expanded, and pastoral peoples became increasingly influential. This period also saw the rise of several Fulani-led Islamic reform movements. So from 1800 to 1900, this is when the Fulani Jihad and colonialism really started becoming a thing. So, the 19th century transformed the Sahel. Major events included the establishment of the Sokoto Caliphate by Usman da Fodio. Hopefully, I said that correctly. If I didn't, I apologize. The expansion of Islamic states, increasing European exploration, French and British colonial conquest. By the end of the century, most of the Sahel had been incorporated into European colonial empires. So from 1900 to 1960, the colonial rule. So European administrations redrew borders, imposed new tax systems, developed export agriculture, expanded railways, selectively established colonial capitals. So traditional caravan trade declined in importance. Many ethnic groups found themselves divided by the new international boundaries. So from 1960 to 1980, a lot of these countries went independent. So countries across the Sahel gained independence. New governments faced challenges including droughts, rapid population growth, limited infrastructure, political instability, and balancing ethnic diversity within colonial era borders. So, from the 1990s to the 2010s, we have a lot of political instability. So, several countries experienced civil wars, rebellions, ethnic conflicts, desertification concerns, and expanding urbanization. At the same time, cities such as Dakar, Bamako, Niamey, and N'Djamena grew rapidly. So, from the 2010s to the present, climate and security challenges. So, the modern Sahel is shaped by a combination of environmental and political pressures, rising temperatures, variable rainfall, population growth, migration, insurgencies in parts of the region, and military coups in several states. Despite these challenges, the Sahel remains a region of vibrant cultures, expanding cities, influential Islamic scholarship, rich musical traditions, and enduring pastoral and agricultural livelihoods. Okay, so this next section is about me going over the average phenotype of Sahelians. So the first thing that I always clear up in every video like this is that there is no single Sahelian phenotype. The Sahel stretches over 5,000 kilometers, 3,100 miles from the Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea and contains dozens of distinct populations. Nevertheless, anthropologists have long recognized that many indigenous Sahelian populations share a number of overlapping physical characteristics due to geography, climate, and centuries of gene flow. So, if you were to create a composite individual to create an average Sahelian phenotype that represents many indigenous Sahelian populations, such as the Fulani, Hausa, Kanuri, Zagawa, and some neighboring groups, you might expect the following. So when it comes to the skin tone, they're typically medium, dark brown to dark brown, often with warm, golden, reddish, or olive undertones. They're generally lighter on average than many equatorial rainforest populations, though there is substantial overlap. The region exhibits continuous variation rather than sharp divisions. Hair is usually black or very dark brown, tightly curled to coiled. Textures vary from light, very tightly coiled to loose curls in some populations. Eyes, on average, they are dark brown and overwhelmingly predominant there. Almond-shaped eyes are also common but not universal. When it comes to their faces, many Sahelian populations tend to have relatively long, narrow faces, moderate to high cheekbones, medium to strong jawlines, broad variation in facial proportions. When it comes to their nose, it's one of the most variable traits. Many groups have noses that are, on average, medium in width, moderately projecting, narrower than the average in many equatorial West African rainforest populations, and generally broader than the average in Mediterranean or Northern European populations. However, there is wide overlap both within and between populations. When it comes to their lips, they are typically medium to full, and there are considerable variations that does exist. When it comes to their build, many indigenous Sahelian populations are characterized by tall stature, especially in eastern proportions of the Sahel, relatively long limbs, lean physiques, and low body fat under traditional lifestyles. These proportions are consistent with adaptations to hot, arid climates, although nutrition and lifestyle also play important roles. Okay, so I'm going to briefly talk about the different areas of the Sahel as it's not a uniform. So, Western Sahel includes parts of Senegal, Mali, and Mauritania. Obviously, due to its proximity to West Africa and the groups of people in West Africa, many populations here tend to resemble neighboring West African groups while also showing historical influences from Saharan populations, so they might have more admixture due to that. Then we have the Central Sahel, which includes much of Niger and Congo. So, from what I can recall, this region contains some of the greatest phenotypic diversity, reflecting long-standing interactions among the Sahara, West African, and East African populations, which makes sense because it's in the middle, so they have closer proximity to East Africa than the Western Sahel, and it has more access to West Africa than the Eastern Sahel. So it kind of just makes sense. And then we have the Eastern Sahel, which includes parts of Sudan. So it's essentially Sudan. So the populations here often grade into those of the Nile Valley and northeastern Africa. So it has direct ties to Egypt, pretty much, with many groups tending towards the narrower facial features and taller stature, though again with substantial diversity. I also think this happens due to the proximity to the Horn of Africa, too. And the final part of this video is me talking about their relationship with race. So obviously, the Sahel is a continuum, not a race biologically. Modern genetics does not recognize Sahelian as a biological race. Instead, the Sahel is a clan, a broad zone where neighboring populations have exchanged genes for thousands of years. Rather than a sharp boundary, there are gradual transitions. North toward the Sahara and Mediterranean North Africa, south toward the Sudanian savannas and tropical West Africa, east towards the Nile Valley and the Horn of Africa, and west towards Atlantic West Africa. As a result, many Sahelian populations share ancestry with multiple neighboring regions, but the proportions vary widely from one group to another. So historically, race wasn't the organizing principle. So before European colonialism, people in the Sahel generally identified themselves by ethnicity, language, religion, clan or lineage, kingdom or empire, or occupation, i.e., farmer, herder, merchant, scholar. There were certainly ideas about ancestry, status, and quote unquote outsiders, but they did not map neatly onto today's concept of race. Obviously, the colonial racial classification changed everything. So, beginning in the 19th century, so the 1800s, European anthropologists attempted to classify African people into races. Many Sahelian populations were assigned to categories such as Hamitic, Ethiopian, Sudanic, Negroid. These classifications were based largely on physical appearance and reflected outdated scientific ideas. Many of them also carried colonial biases and have since been rejected by anthropology. So, the modern racial framework. So, today the answer depends on the society in question. So, in North America, most indigenous Sahelian peoples and their descendants would generally be socially categorized as black because North American racial systems emphasize broad continental ancestry and visible traits rather than finer regional distinctions. This broad category includes people from a vast range of African populations, including those from the Sahel. So, in Europe, experiences vary by country, but many Sahelian immigrants are likewise perceived as black or African. At the same time, some lighter skinned Sahelian groups, particularly those with strong MSZ or Arab heritage, may be perceived differently depending on the context. So, within Africa, race is often less salient or than ethnic identity, nationality, language, religion, and region. A person may identify primarily as Fulani, Hausa, Kanuri, Zagawa, or another ethnic group rather than with a broad racial label. Why do Sahelians sometimes challenge simple racial categories? So, the Sahel has long been a meeting place between populations from North Africa and those farther south. Because of this history, some populations resemble neighboring West African groups more closely, others resemble Saharan or Northeast African groups more closely, and many fall somewhere in between. This diversity reflects continuous human variation rather than discrete biological races and the Sahel and the idea of Black Africa, quote unquote. The phrase sub Saharan Africa is often used in geography and history, but the Sahel illustrates why that term has limits. The Sahara has certainly acted as a barrier at times, yet it has also been crossed by trades, scholars, pilgrims, and pastoralists for over 2 millennia. The Sahel was the southern edge of these networks, making it both part of sub-Saharan Africa and deeply connected to North Africa. As a result, many Sahelian societies developed through sustained interaction across the desert rather than in isolation from it. Okay, so that concludes my video on the Sahelian population. It was definitely very interesting looking at this region. Some probably don't even consider this their own region, but I definitely do feel like they deserve their own video since they're kind of in North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa and kind of have their own thing going on. So I'm glad I did this video. The next video is going to be about Central Asia. I'm definitely looking forward to that. And I think after that, I think I would have covered most of the admixed groups. So I'll probably focus on either the rest of Africa or the rest of Asia after that. Anyways, thank you all for continuing to watch and support. I will be back with more content soon. Take care.